Okay, welcome everyone. So this is our last lecture. We're going to cover some of the key concepts in chapter 12 and then do some multiple choice questions. Okay, so in this chapter we're talking about factor markets. Up till now, we've only looked at the market for goods and services. But what about stuff, there's a market for materials that are used to make stuff, or any inputs. There's also a market for labor, and that's what we'll be focusing on. So we're going to derive a labor demand curve, and we're going to just only look at a competitive labor market. Okay? So we know that a demand curve is in the wage and quantity of labor space. Okay, so wage is the price of labor, that's on the vertical axis, and on the horizontal axis is the amount of labor. Okay, and so basically the demand for labor curve shows how much labor would be demanded at different wages. And so how does a firm decide how much labor to hire? So we're going to talk about this in more detail, but we're going to use our marginal principles, which, in general, we should keep doing something as long as the marginal benefit is equal to the marginal cost. In this case, the marginal benefit of hiring a worker is how much they can produce and the dollar value of that. So how much increase in revenue do you get from increasing your input? And so again, we'll see that we will keep hiring as long as the additional benefit, the marginal revenue product, will be equal to the marginal cost. In this case, since it's a competitive labor market, it'll be the wage. Okay, so since we're assuming a competitive labor market, that means that any particular firm is so small they have no influence over the wage rate. They're not a very large employer compared to the whole labor market, so they just take whatever the wage is as given. Similar to how a competitive firm, a perfectly competitive firm in the product market, takes the price as given. Okay, and as we'll see, this will trace out a labor demand curve. Okay, so we're going to illustrate this with some data. So in the first column here, we have the units of the input or resource. Let's just think about this as labor. Okay, so we're hiring 1 up to 7 people. Now, we have the total product of each worker. And so if you remember from the previous chapter, I believe it was chapter 6, we can figure out what the marginal product is of labor. Okay, so for the first unit of labor hired, the production is 7. So the marginal product of the first worker is 7. The marginal product of the second worker is 13 minus 7, so that would be 6. Okay, so if we calculate that for all of them, this is our marginal product. Okay, here we're given the product price, so it's a perfectly competitive market for goods and services as well as the labor market in this example. So the price is given at $2, that's the market price. And so our total revenue will just be the price times the output, okay? And that would be our total revenue. Now, what is marginal revenue product? Well, it's just the change in total revenue divided by the change in labor, or the input in general. So in this case, if we hire the first unit of labor, they're going to produce 7 units, so that's their marginal product. Now, what's that worth to the firm? Well, it's worth $2 times 7. And so the marginal revenue product here would be 14. So the marginal revenue product is the change in total revenue divided by the change in a particular input. In this case, we're thinking about labor. So if we calculate the marginal revenue product for each unit of labor, we'll get something like this. And one thing to point out is, at some point, because of diminishing returns, we see that this will end up falling, right? Because diminishing returns means that the marginal product will fall, and if we're multiplying that by a constant market price, then of course the marginal revenue product will at some point fall. Okay, so let's think about what the demand curve for labor is then. So here I have the column 1, so this is the different amounts of labor. This is the marginal revenue product. So if you hire the first worker, you get 14. You hire the second worker, you get 12. You can see diminishing returns has already started to apply here. But how do we get a demand curve out of this? Well, let's think about it. We made the assumption that the labor market is perfectly competitive, so that means the firm will take the wage as given. And so we know the firm would want to hire as long as the marginal benefit from hiring exceeds the marginal cost. Well, what's the marginal benefit of hiring? Well, it's the marginal revenue product. What's the marginal cost of hiring a worker? Well, it's the fixed wage rate. So a firm would want to keep hiring as long as the marginal revenue product is greater than the wage. Okay, so in a perfectly competitive labor market, the firm takes the wages given, and so they're going to hire as long as marginal revenue product is greater than the wage, and they'll stop when marginal revenue product is equal to the wage. So here, for example, if the market wage was $14, then the firm would only hire one worker. If the wage was $12, they'll hire up to 2 workers. Right? The first worker, they'll make some extra revenue over and above their cost because it's $14 is the marginal revenue, so they would definitely hire one worker, and then they pay them $12. And then the next worker, we're just at the threshold, so the marginal revenue product would be the same as the wage, and that's where we would stop. We wouldn't want to hire a third worker here, because if we hire the third worker, the value that the firm is going to get is only 10, but it's going to cost $12 for the wage, and so you would stop there. So as you can see, the labor demand curve traces out different wages and quantity of labor that would be hired. So you got to think about it as a what if concept. So what if the wage was 14? Well, firms would hire one worker. What if the wage was 4? If the wage was $4, they would hire up to 6 workers. Okay, so the marginal revenue product then is simply the labor demand curve. Okay, now as you will remember, you could have marginal product of labor increase and then decrease. If that's the case, then your marginal revenue product will increase and then decrease. The labor demand curve will only be the downward sloping portion of the demand for labor curve. Similar reason why the marginal cost curve is only the upward sloping portion of the curve. If you have marginal cost falling and then increasing, the supply curve is only on the increasing part. So for similar reasons, the demand curve for labor is decreasing. That's the only section that we consider. The demand for labor would be this decreasing section. Okay, and again, it's just tracing out what firms would want to hire for different wage rates in the market. Now there's also a supply of labor. We're not going to go into the theoretical details in this chapter, but just keep in mind the labor supply is made up of people who are willing and able to work, and the labor force supply measures, it could measure different things. It could measure, if you're thinking of a particular person, it could measure how much hours they'd want to work at different wages, or you could think of it more generally, so how many people would want to work at all at different wages. And for the most part, the supply of labor would be upward sloping, but not always. It could actually bend backwards because of what's called the income effect. For example, if your wage increased by a lot, you may actually, there's 2 components to a wage increase. One is that you'd want to work more because you're getting paid more per hour, and that will make you want to work more if the wage goes higher. But when the wage goes higher, you're also having more income, and you may also want to have more leisure. You can afford to have more leisure if your wage is higher. So it depends on how large the wage is, but at some point you could actually reduce your hours worked. So this income effect would dominate the other effect, which is called the substitution effect, which is just saying that you'd want to work more for higher wages. But for this course, we're just going to focus on the upward. If we look at it generally, a supply curve is upward sloping. Overall in the market, it would be upward sloping. But if we're thinking about a particular firm in a competitive labor market, then basically we're treating the I'll just bring it up here. We're treating the wage as a perfectly, the supply curve as being perfectly elastic. And this is similar to how we treated an individual firm's demand curve. Remember, it was perfectly elastic and perfect competition because they're just taking the price as given. Here they're taking the wages given. They're not going to pay more than, the firm here is not going to pay more than the market wage because they can just pay the market wage. They would, that would cost them profit. And they're not, they can't charge below the market wage because the workers can always get the market wage. So when we draw a supply curve for an individual firm, they're facing a perfectly elastic supply curve. Okay, so let's start our multiple choice questions. So the first question here says, what is the term for the increase in a firm's total revenue which results from the use of one more unit of input? So hit pause, try and answer, and I'll be back with the answer in a sec. Okay, so the answer here is obviously the marginal revenue product. Next question is, it says, all of the following except one are true statements about the marginal revenue product. Which is the exception? So hit pause, try and figure it out. Okay, so the correct answer here is C. So we know that A is true. Change in total revenue over the change in inputs. That's what marginal revenue product is. That's our formula. We can also figure that out by multiplying the marginal product of labor, which is how much each additional unit of labor gives you in terms of product. And then to get the value of that, we just multiply it by the price. Okay. And so C is our correct answer. And then D says it's the increase in total revenue that results from the use of one more unit of input. Well, again, of course, that's true. That's basically the, describing what the formula is. Okay, next question. Which of the following is correct regarding the demand for labor curve? So hit pause. Okay, so the correct answer here is B. It's the downward portion of the marginal revenue product curve. So we don't want to include the upward sloping portion of a marginal revenue product curve, which would occur if you have increasing marginal returns to labor at first and then diminishing returns kicks in later. If diminishing returns is always happening, then you'll always just have a downward sloping portion. Okay, so for this question we have a table. We have the quantity of the input, so this could be labor. We have the total product. So if we hire 2 workers, the total product would be 10. So when we hire the second worker as opposed to the first worker, they increase total production by 6. So their marginal product of labor is 6, and we're given the unit price of the product. And so now the question is asking, at its optimal output, what quantity of labor will this firm want to employ if the market wage is $8? Okay, so hit pause. Okay, well, I hope you figured it out. So we need to know what the marginal revenue product is for each of the workers, and then we're going to just hire labor up to that point. So in this case, the answer is 7. I made a little table here. Here I've calculated the marginal revenue product, and I did it by just multiplying the marginal product of labor times the price. Okay, if we do that, that's the marginal revenue product, and that's the same as what the change in total revenue would be divided by the change in labor. And we see here, so if the market wage is $8, we would hire up to 7 workers. That's because the marginal revenue product of all these are above $8, so the firm would want to hire them. They're going to get, for example, here $12, but only have to pay $8. But it's only at the 7th worker where the actual benefits is equal to the wage or the marginal cost. And so we would stop at 7 units of labor, and that would maximize our profit. Okay, question 5, same table here. Now it's saying at its optimal point, what is Nearly Doan's total revenue if the market wage rate is $8? Okay, so I'll pause it. So pause it, you pause it, and then we'll see how you do. Okay, so the correct answer here is, of course, $92. So we know the product price is $2. We know that they're going to hire 7 units of labor. And if they hire 7 units of labor, they're going to get output of 46 units. So they're going to have 46 units. They're priced at $2, so we multiply that and we get the total revenue, which is $92. Okay, now in this question, we're asked, what is Nearly Doan's total profit or loss if the market wage is $8? So total fixed costs are $24, and labor costs are the only variable cost. Okay, so hit pause and try and figure this out. Well, okay, how did you do? Well, first of all, we know the total revenue from the previous question was 92. We just need to figure out what the total cost is. Okay, well, there's two types of cost. There's fixed cost and variable cost. We know the total fixed costs are $24. We just need to figure out what the variable costs are. Well, the variable costs are only labor, and we know we hired 7 units of labor, and we know how much we pay them. The wage was $8. So if we multiply 7 times 8, we get the total variable costs. And the answer here in this case will be $12 of profit. Okay, so the total revenue is 92. Labor is $56, so we're going to multiply how much labor we're using times how much each unit costs, which is $8. We get the 56. The fixed cost is 24, so 92 minus these two equals $12. Okay, next question. It says to look at the diagram here. So this is actually a chart or diagram of Nearly Doan's marginal revenue product curve. So we can see it increases and then decreases. So diminishing return sets in around here. So we know the demand curve is only going to be this downward sloping portion. So the question is asking, how much labor will Nearly Doan Inc. employ if the market wage rate is $12? Okay, so hit pause and try and answer it. Okay, so the answer to this question is obtained by going to 12 on the vertical axis. So this is how much the wage rate is. Okay, so if they hire, say, 4 workers, marginal revenue product is higher than the wage. So we keep going. We keep going until this point. At this point, we would hire 6 units of labor. If we were to hire the 7th unit of labor, we would pay $12, but our marginal revenue would only be 8 here. So that wouldn't make sense. We would lose money if we did that. So we stop here. So the answer, of course, is 6 units of labor. Okay, next question. Question 8. Which of the following statements is true if a firm is hiring labor under conditions of a perfectly competitive factor market? So what did we say? Okay, hit pause and try and answer. Okay, did you figure it out? Okay, so as I said at the beginning of the slides, an individual firm's labor supply curve will be perfectly elastic. Basically, the wage is fixed. When we draw that perfectly elastic supply curve, we're just sort of indicating that the wage is fixed. You can't charge more. There's no reason to, you can't pay anything less than the market wage. That's what you pay for labor in a perfectly competitive labor market. Okay, next question. Oh, sorry. And this is just the slide that I've showed you before, just reminding you of the fact that we draw the labor supply curve for an individual firm in a perfectly competitive labor market as a perfectly elastic curve at the market wage rate. And so in this example, this is the firm, this is the wage rate they face. They're just going to set that equal to their marginal revenue product, which is the demand for labor curve, and hire Q1 units of labor. Okay, question 9. Which of the following statements is correct regarding an individual firm which obtains its labor in a perfectly competitive labor market? Okay, so hit pause and try and answer. Okay, I hope you figured it out. The correct answer is D. it faces a downward sloping labor demand curve and a horizontal labor supply curve. Okay, I'm just driving home that point about the horizontal labor supply curve. We know that it will face a downward sloping labor demand curve, and it's downward sloping. Essentially what's driving that is the diminishing marginal returns, as we saw. So the correct answer here is D. Okay, so last question. Question 10. Suppose the original supply and demand curves for labor are S1 and D1. So this is S1 and D1. Okay. This point A, or sorry, this would be point E. Okay. So now it's saying, what can you conclude has happened if a new equilibrium at A, so at point A, occurs? So now we're at point A. Okay, so at point A, what happened? We went from here to here. So we must have it that the demand curve shifted from D1 to D2. Okay, so now it's asking you to indicate the correct answer. So I'll hit pause and let you figure it out. Okay, so let's go through each of these in turn. So A says the wage rate and the equilibrium quantity have increased while the demand for labor has decreased. So we know the demand curve shifted to the right. So we know that the demand for labor did not decrease. Okay. Also, it is true that the wage would be higher and the quantity of labor, but this is an incorrect second part of the statement. Okay, the demand for labor did not decrease. In B, it says the wage rate and the equilibrium quantity have increased while the supply of labor has decreased. Well, if we look here, the quantity of labor supply increased because the wage goes up. That's just a movement along the supply curve, and that's fine. But the supply curve did not shift, as it's insinuating here by saying the supply of labor has decreased. This is saying it's shifted to the left. We know here that it's the quantity of labor, quantity supplied of labor, that has increased. C, it says the wage rate and the equilibrium quantity have increased. Okay, that's true. While both the demand for and supply of labor has increased. Well, we know that that's not true because the supply curve didn't shift, so that's not true. D, the demand for labor, the wage rate, and the equilibrium quantity have all increased. So let's see, does that make sense? Well, we know the demand for labor did increase. That's this curve shifting to the right. And the wage and the equilibrium quantity have all increased. So this is the correct answer. Let's look at E to see why it's not correct. The supply of labor, the wage rate, and the equilibrium quantity have all increased. Again, the supply curve did not shift. So that's why E is not correct. So the correct answer here is D. Okay, I've also included the solutions here. So this is posted on Slate for you. So please review it for when you're studying the exam. Okay, I just wanted to again remind you about the final exam. So the final exam is going to be held during regular class time next week. So you need to use Lockdown Browser to be able to do the final exam. Now, you must complete the ungraded practice quiz that's there. The purpose of this quiz is just to test that Lockdown Browser works for you. It doesn't matter what you answer these questions, but you need to do this in order to access the final exam. So you need to do this before next week. So how about we just do it now? To do it, all you need to do, go to Slate. Here's your Slate page, and I made a link for you. All you need to do is click on it. I'll go in as a student. You click on it. It gives you some information here, and you launch the Lockdown Browser. If you don't have it, it gives you an opportunity to download it there. It brings you in. So you need to do the mandatory practice quiz. Make sure you do that now. Do it actually just after watching this video. It only takes a few minutes. It's your responsibility to have a working internet connection and be able to use Lockdown Browser for the exam. And so again, in terms of the structure, there's going to be 50 multiple choice questions. 5 of them will be from pre-midterm material, but the rest will be from post-midterm material. I highly suggest that you view the active learning questions in the lecture slides. You review the questions at the end of the chapters. There are solutions posted on Slate for those. And you also have self-check quizzes that are multiple choice in the Connect platform. To go into the Connect platform, you just go to the McGraw-Hill box here on the front of our Slate site. Go to My Connect section. And then you will see here at the bottom self-check quizzes, and they're done for each chapter. You can go in and do these. There's no grade. You can do them as many times as you like. I think this would be, a helpful review for the final exam. And you also have practice problems here. We have those in-class exercises we did before. You have exam practice problems. So you have lots of different things. And I'm also going to post this PowerPoint slide. So these 10 multiple choice questions we just did in this folder here. Okay, so what I'm going to do, I'll send you information shortly. I'm going to have a question and answer period over the WebEx for all of my sections. I'm probably going to do that Friday morning or Thursday morning. I will send you an email shortly and let you know the times for that. Okay? Well, thank you for listening and enjoy the rest of the day. Take care. Bye.